This is another creative organization, and this is what I was saying was almost by the direct opposite of Publicis, the Letrux space we just saw. But so we designed a space for Squarespace. They're a web design platform and web services platform, and we had been working with them like that Peloton story I had when they were very small. They were, I think, 70 or 80 people, 90 people maybe. It's been a long time since we started, and we grew them into new offices. And this is very much a creative, a representation of a creative identity for the firm, but specific to them. So very different from what we were looking at with Publicis. But they're a very interesting business in that they're a B2C or a business to customer relationship. So they have customers who buy their product, but those customers themselves are small businesses. So there's this balance between being a business services company and being a customer service company. And so this is almost their version of a retail space, what we're looking at right now. And we took over a loading dock in a building that didn't need the scale of loading dock it had and built what's essentially an apartment. And it's an apartment that they can bring people into and host. They can have meetups where they talk to their users about how to build successful businesses on their platform, how to show their art or their creativity through the platform. And it offers this element of engaging the public, those who use Squarespace as a platform, those who are interested in Squarespace, into Squarespace a little bit. And you'll see there's a certain aesthetic going on here that carries upstairs, but it has a second purpose, which is upstairs. You'll see in a second, the people all work on slightly more than Publicis, slightly more traditional floors, traditional ways of engaging with one another and sitting relative to one another. And this offers that sort of getaway where special project teams or people whose minds need to be in a different place can come down. This is at the ground floor of a building, and they have the top 3 floors. They can come down here and get out of the office without leaving the office, still be supported with the structures and Wi-Fi and file server systems and everything that you get as a benefit of being in an office. But to just change your perspective for a while so that you can really, really find a different way to engage with the work you're doing. And so that was kind of the beginning. Then you get upstairs and you see the same kind of aesthetic simplicity and uniformity upstairs as you saw downstairs. And that's kind of what I wanted to get to is Squarespace is very much a company whose philosophy is Squarespace's brand should sit quietly in the background of our user's brand. So if you're building a watch store on Squarespace, you don't want it to say powered by Squarespace. You want your customer or your visitor to come and see what you're doing and or if you're an artist and Squarespace is your artist platform, your art should shine. Squarespace should just be the scaffolding on which you can hang your art, and it shouldn't tell its own story in front of you. And this space sort of defines that simplicity. Squarespace is frames. I mean, it's why it's called Squarespace. It's how we imagined it. It's like spaces for you to insert the things that are meaningful to you and present them to the world. And that's not presenting Squarespace to the world. So the space has this white and black kind of dynamic. And there's a reason for that. I mean, part of it is a very sort of a desire for a very clean aesthetic, clean without being too rigid, let's say, because you can see there's a bit of wavy lines here and some softness in the corners, but still tell the story of almost a binary. And to your point about have we watched how Publicis worked, part of where that binary argument came from is it's very much Anthony Casalena, the founder of Squarespace, loves minimal palettes and loves kind of a rigid a hierarchy of colors and what they do. And so in this case, it's black and white and gray. But when we were designing this for them, I spent a lot of time sitting and observing Squarespace working in their offices. And we realized that they work tightly together. You can see the workspace on the right and the collaborative space on the left. And they work tightly together, and they were coders. And there was a problem that it was very, very difficult for people who are deep into their work to endure the disruptions, the people next to them who needed help. And the way coding works, and this is about as much as I understand about computer coding, but is that, when you're deep in a flow, you become very productive, and it takes time. We all understand the creative work or the creative urge. It takes time to get yourself in a mind state where you're absolutely actually producing very, very effectively. And that can be interrupted. And when it's interrupted, it's very hard to get back into that state of mind. And when there's a bug in your coding, or things aren't working right, it's almost impossible to be productive. So there's this sort of this dialectic, or this binary on the floor, of people who are deeply in need of support and people who want to be left alone. And we found, when I watched them, I saw it happen time and time again. And in talking to the individuals who were doing the hard work of coding Squarespace platform, that was their biggest complaint. Was, when I need help, I need to talk to somebody. If I talk to somebody, I interrupt the floor and everything breaks down, to the point where they had actually defined no question Thursday, I think it was, or no talk Thursday, where nobody could actually ask anyone any questions, so they could get stuff done, which is great if you're getting stuff done. But like I said, if your process isn't working, it's a terrible day. You're not going to get anything done, because you can't ask anybody to help you. So we built a space where on the right side is the open workspace, the white space, essentially, the bright space. It's near the windows. And we built collaborative space immediately off of the floor. So it was really easy to people to duck into little rooms. There are lots of little rooms there that you can see and you can't see, to collaborate. The idea was to visually, very, very rigidly define, hey, you're in a bright white space. That's a quiet space where we're going to sit and work in a focused way. If you're in these darker, warmer, kind of cozier interior spaces, those are the spaces where you can be loud and collaborative, and to try and begin to build a pattern where people knew where to be sort of loud and engaging, and knew where to be, in focus and dedicated. It was a little bit the background philosophy of them, and it was based on what we saw and heard from them. And we break the rule. Here's rule breaking number one. But this is also, if you can build the space where they can get away from the floor and be collaborative and think through a problem, as close to the floor as possible, they can get right back to what they really want to do, which is code. They really want to get code down that works and is satisfying. And I think one of the things, we talked about places like, Google's 90s offices, which were lots of candy colors and skateboards and stuff like that. When you talk to people who, especially the youngest employees who work in creative firms, what they really want is to be creative and be productive and make really great things that they can be proud of and that support the people around them who are trying to do the exact same thing. What they really don't need is a scooter. It's not the thing that supports the process they need to run. And the Squarespace was a big piece of that. This was started in 2012, which is kind of the heart of the ping pong table aesthetic in tech. And this was defiantly anti that. This was about the amenities of the space are all in how this space is going to help them feel really, really good about their work and feel like they're doing something. Whoop, those pages broke down. I feel like they're doing something really creative. And then there are spaces to break away too. So, that rule of dark and light breaks down a little bit. But what we've got is the dining room to our right, and then this multi-purpose bar, which is where they feed themselves. There's a bar, which is coffee in the morning and beer at night. Those concrete platforms you see are both a stage, and they have induction units under them, so they can drop they cater to everybody who works there. They can drop pans and keep food hot on those. But the instant they take them away, they can roll a stool up and use it as a workspace. There's this notion that, hey, this space is going to be a living space that you're going to want to be in 24 hours a day or 18 hours a day if you want. And it's going to be there to support you and to help you connect with the people you work with and to feel excited and happy, in the work that you do. And it sounds kind of like, and I hear this story a lot, like social engineering on a business side. But I think at the same time, there's a company that wants a space that helps them, get their product out in the world and be a great company. The people who work there want to be really, especially talented, creative people, want to have an environment where they can make the most of the skills they've built and the learnings they've built. And I think that's the way I like to approach this is, there's the service that you're doing and the ability to support creative work is mutually supportive, and that's why we talked to everybody we did and build these strategies for how a space can support those who work there from both perspectives: the perspectives of the people who founded companies and deeply desire them to grow and to be successful, and the people who have joined companies and deeply desire to be their best creative and productive individual in those environments.
And I think this is a great example in comparison with the last project about how you have such a different design strategy and material and color selection, and how this design depends on the company. Like ideas and the way of thinking right now.
Yeah, and I think what it proves is like if you're and that's absolutely correct, by the way. It's Publicis looks like it does, the Latruc space we looked at before, because it was a client-focused response to the problem we understood the client had. And this looks the way it does because it's a client-focused response to the problem we had. And they're both loved by the clients and everyone who's part of that organization. Both of them are loved in equal measure for different reasons. And they do different things, but they're kind of aligned. But you were mentioning conservative clients, or not politically conservative, but socially conservative, or whatever the right way to say it. Different businesses that maybe aren't so forward as a Squarespace, or very much forward like a Latruc. But the argument is the same: is if you can get to know the client's ambitions and be able to put voice to something that they might not be able to ask you. You can begin to understand and use all of the tools that we have as architects and designers to really start to address them. And in any case, it can be beautiful. It doesn't have to be a perfect union of a creative client and a creative architect, and my aesthetic matches their need. You can develop and build and refine an aesthetic through the lens of the client. One of my friends and actually former colleagues now, but one of A+I's kind of founding creative voices always used to say that we do our best to produce the most beautiful version of the client's idea rather than our idea. And that's going to be more beautiful in the end. It's going to be more useful and more beautiful if we can almost embed ourselves and be an architect within the client's organizations, be the client's sort of lens rather than impose a will on the client. I took that question a little different direction, but I think you're seeing it the way I like to see it as well, which is aesthetically, conceptually very different, and very based on what we learned about the client and what really helps solve the problems that they're trying to wrestle with.
And Peter, you mentioned that you spend a lot of time observing their way of work, how they code, how they go through this process. Can you explain more about the design process timeline, like how
Sure.
it goes through it?
So it really depends on client. We did a project for a French luxury fashion company that we spent. I always say we spent a year. I think it was more like 9 months, but just in engaging with their people. They really felt like they didn't know what they needed to build, what they needed to design. They felt like our value to them was in listening and working through them to figure out what the next generation of this. I can't name them by name, but they're a prominent company. And they needed to figure it out, and we were going to be essentially their sociologists in that process. And then we built the space for them, and through the lens of the needs that we helped uncover with them. That was 9 months. That was a lot of time. I mean, you really get to know somebody, and we talked to every single person in that organization, which was helpful. But typically, this strategic process is something like 6 to 12 weeks. It's about as much as most clients, and tenant clients are interesting because they come to us with a timeline. They've signed a lease, or their lease is expiring, and they've got a deadline, and you need to work towards that deadline, and you can't let that deadline slip because they won't have a home. And so it clarifies the mind. It really focuses your attention on getting to a solution, which is helpful, I think, in our industry. It's also more predictable, which is great. The more predictable architecture can be in terms of timeline and schedule, the better off you are as a designer. And so that kind of work usually takes something like 6 to 12 weeks. And we bolt that onto the beginning of every single project we do. We work with the client to understand how much of a task the strategic engagement, the research and understanding is going to take. And then we usually do our best to fit the schedule that they have available to us. They usually come and say, I've got to be in 14 months. What can you do? And we try and expand or truncate our process as best we can. Really complicated problems involve a lot of observation, a lot of research, a lot of conversations, a lot of analysis, to get a really, really resonant solution that's tuned to what the client actually needs. That takes a lot of time. The rest of the architecture phases, and the architect is part of that process. So I don't want it to sound like I, as a strategist, or my team's strategists, sit alone and generate the vision for the project. And, sitting next to us at all times are the non-strategy focused designers listening to the client as well. We sit in rooms together and say, what did we hear? What do we think it means? Can we find sympathetic voices in other people, or what they're asking for, what their needs are, what their challenges are, in contrast to others? I mean, those are the really interesting things. It's like two different people doing similar jobs, telling you that their problems are opposite problems to one another is a design problem. How do you then start to design spaces around those conversations? Usually what you find is there's a thread or two that highlights what they really desire or what they're really trying to solve for. And you can do that within 2 to 4 months of focused work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of time for most clients, and we have we get a lot of people who question why that's necessary. And to be honest, we as a firm have learned to talk clients through that. And if clients don't believe it's necessary, we typically don't work with them. We're comfortable and happy to help clients find a different architect that's a better fit for them, because we believe that process is invaluable and is the only way that we know how to design. I don't think we very much also avoid design competitions for the same reason, which is someone tells us what they want in a brief, and without any input from the client, without any real understanding other than what they write in a brief, we're supposed to tell them their future, design their future for them in a building or in a space. And I find that antithetical to our process. If our job is to understand deeply what you need from a perspective you may not have, then we need that luxury of time. We need that period to understand you, and that can't be done from a distance, from a sheet of paper, or from a design brief in a competition setting. So that sets us apart a little bit as well. And there are great projects we've turned down. There are wonderful clients we've had to unfortunately not work with, really amazing opportunities, because if we believe in the way we practice architecture in our process, we can't take those challenges on, because we don't believe that's the right way to get to a meaningful solution for a project.
And one thing is, this is specifically for your job. You have this direct relationship with their own career and business. And I had this question. I'm sure it's happened for you before. Did you come to a client that had this unrealistic expectation that was not for their career, but you have to manage between this idea of how to just go with the client and what's the best for their business?
It's an interesting question. I don't have nothing comes to mind right now that seems wildly unrealistic. Often what's really unrealistic is price or schedule, not vision. Usually a vision, anything that's intrinsic to a client and who they are. If somebody works for or runs an organization or a company or an agency, they usually have a very, very, they're very good visceral understanding of themselves and their business. You need to talk to them and help them understand what it means in architecture. Make sure that they're not trying to be their own architect and tell you what to design, because that's where the challenge happens. But typically, if you listen to them and you're very open and open-minded with them, and and willing to not really confront them, but willing to discuss with them where their understanding and expectations counter to the way you see them or the way you understand them, and help use that conversation to build a real meaningful understanding of what's possible. Nothing usually seems that unrealistic. Usually the ideas, you both begin as a client and as a design team to understand how realistic and how necessary those decisions are. Where it becomes unrealistic, I think, is where the client feels like they're obliged to be the architect, to be the designer, or often, and I point no fingers at anyone with this. They have unrealistic expectations of how long things take, how much things cost. And we try and be extraordinarily open about it. It's to our benefit to tell them, this is the price we see in the market. This is our cost as designers, and this is how much it costs to build things. And we all know architecture is incredibly expensive. I always joke that, it's one of the most expensive things our clients will ever do is put, sometimes tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into an architectural project. I mean, it is extraordinarily expensive, and you have to, as a designer, respect that, especially in, like you were saying, staying on schedule and budget. Yeah. These are monumental, risks people are taking, and they're believing in you. They're seeing you as a steward of that project, and you're representing that risk for them. And so it's really, really important to be with them during that and prove to them that you're listening and understand them, but that you are also a design professional with talent and wisdom, and that you know how to solve the problems that you've laid out for them. As long as you've built that relationship with them and they understand that you embody their hopes and their needs, there's usually a very, very strong level of trust between us and our clients then at that point. And so the unrealistic expectations almost always are caused by the client representing a part of the process they don't really understand well and think can be done faster, or with less money, or with less time, or less engagement. But clients can demand or expect wildly unrealistic creativity from us, and we're happy to oblige. So.
And having an architect is gonna pay off at the end. They're gonna get the reward. This is a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to talk over you. There's I think about this, and we mentioned it, and it's part of how we hire and how I like to run the parts of business that I'm responsible for. But is that I hire people who are graphic designers or brand designers or strategists, practice outside of traditional architecture, but and not all of them, and I don't mean disrespect for any of my good friends and colleagues out the door who aren't architects, but almost to a person, we're trained as architects. And as we've been talking, I think about it in this way, and it was clarified. What this conversation clarified it for me a little bit, which is, we're talking about clients' business with them, but from the minds of an architect whose perspective is in how that business lives in space. And the more you can align with them and almost become a piece of their company and try and be empathetic to what their job is, but don't lose the fact that you're thinking of solutions and answers which are spatial, which are architectural, which are environmental and experiential. That's a really powerful tool. Like putting yourself into another industry as a designer of space and a designer of those environments, like that shape the relationships that we have with one another. If you can really start to see what's important to the client and how their world works, and the way that their the challenges and risks and successes that they have every day can be translated into your space, it becomes a really powerful position. One that you have to be absolutely responsible for. And that's a little bit where I think, I don't mean to, burnish architecture as a profession too much, but that's where I think architects are required to be that cipher, or put themselves into those environments with their clients, where they can see the world through the client's eyes, but also through the designer's eyes simultaneously. And that's also part of why it's a challenge when you try and impose too much an expectation or a design aesthetic or a design reality on somebody when it's not theirs, because you'll end up getting into a conflict or under providing for them. You'll design the thing that you want to design rather than the thing that actually addresses their deepest needs and desires. And if you can find a way to design something, sorry about that. If you can find a way to design something that you deeply respect and believe in from an aesthetic or a theoretical point of view, and design something for your client that deeply engages with the problems that they see every day and they're trying to solve, you will be successful. I mean, you can't help but be successful if you get yourself in that position.